Howdy shipmates, it's Captain Dan here. Welcome to Story Time with Captain Dan. A time to lift our spirits during this time of the coronavirus. Stories of old and new for young and old. Any requests? Send them in. And what we're going to look at today, let's have a look. Let's get these old spy glasses on. See what we can see. Ooh, how exciting. It's another Mr. Men classic from Mr. Happy by Roger Hargreaves. So I wonder what this story might be about. Can you guess? On the other side of the world, where the sun shines hotter than here and where the trees are 100 feet tall, there is a country called Happy Land. Sounds good, doesn't it? As you might very well expect, everybody who lives in Happy Land is as happy as the day is long. Wherever you go, you see smiling faces all round. It's such a happy place that even the flowers seem to smile in Happy Land. Wow. And as well as all the people being happy, all the animals in Happy Land are happy as well. If you've never seen a mouse smile, or a cat, or a dog, or even a worm, then go to Happy Land. This is a story about someone who lived there who happened to be called Mr. Happy. Mr. Happy was fat and round and happy. He lived in a very small cottage beside a lake at the foot of a mountain and close to a wood in Happy Land. One day, while Mr. Happy was out walking through the tall trees in those woods near his home, he came across something which was really rather extraordinary. I wonder what it might be. There in the trunk of one of the very tall trees was a door. Can you see it? Not a very large door, but nevertheless a door, certainly a door, a small, narrow, yellow door. Definitely a door. I wonder who lives here, thought Mr. Happy to himself, and he turned the handle of that small, narrow, yellow door. The door wasn't locked, and it swung open quite easily. Just inside the small, narrow, yellow door was a small, narrow, winding staircase leading downwards. Mr. Happy squeezed his rather large body through the very thin doorway and began to walk down the stairs. The stairs went round and round and down and down and round and down and down and around. Eventually, after a long time, Mr. Happy reached the bottom of the staircase. He looked around and saw there in front of him another small, narrow door. But this one was red. Mr. Happy knocked on the door. "Who's there?" said a voice, a sad, squeaky sort. "Who's there?" Mr. Happy pushed open the red door slowly, and there, sitting on a stool, was somebody who looked exactly like Mr. Happy, except he didn't look happy at all. In fact, he looked downright miserable. "Hello," said Mr. Happy. "I'm Mr. Happy." "Oh, you are indeed," sniffed the person who looked like Mr. Happy but wasn't. "Well, my name is Mr. Miserable, and I'm the most miserable person in all the world." "Why are you so miserable?" asked Mr. Happy. "Because I am," replied Mr. Miserable. "How would you like to be happy like me?" asked Mr. Happy. "I'd give anything to be happy," said Mr. Miserable. But I'm so miserable, I don't think I could ever be happy, he added miserably. Mr. Happy made up his mind quickly. Follow me, he said. Where to? Asked Mr. Miserable. Don't argue, said Mr. Happy, and he went out through the small, narrow, red door. Can you see that? Mr. Miserable hesitated and then followed. And up the winding staircase they went, up and round and round and up and round and round and up until they came out in the wood. You see them both. Follow me, said Mr. Happy again, and they both set off through the wood back to Mr. Happy's cottage. Mr. Miserable stayed in Mr. Happy's cottage for quite some time, and during that time the most remarkable thing happened. Because he was living in Happy Land, Mr. Miserable ever so slowly stopped being miserable and started to be happy. His mouth stopped turning down the corners. And you see, it went kind of neutral like mine just did. And ever so slowly, it started turning up at the corners. You see the difference? And eventually, Mr. Miserable did something he'd never done in the whole of his life. He smiled. He did. He smiled. And then he chuckled, which turned into a giggle, which became a laugh. A big, booming, hearty, loud, giant, enormous laugh. And Mr. Happy was so surprised he started to laugh as well. And both of them laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed. And they laughed until their sides hurt and their eyes watered. Mr. Miserable and Mr. Happy laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed. They went outside and still they laughed. And because they were laughing so much, everybody who saw them started laughing as well. Even the birds in the tree started to laugh. And at the thought of somebody called Mr. Miserable who couldn't stop laughing. Look at him. It's hilarious. And that's really the end of the story, except to say that if you ever feel as miserable as Mr. Miserable used to feel, you know exactly what to do, don't you? Just turn your mouth up at the corners. Go on, give it a go. You never know. You might turn into Mr. Happy. So that's the story of Mr. Happy by Roger Hargreaves. Did you start laughing too? It's quite hard not to, wasn't it? It's very infectious laughter. It's the one infectious thing we need to be catching perhaps at this time, because we all need to lift our spirits, don't we? Maybe that's something to think about, something to pass on. If you're going to pass any, don't pass any the other stuff on, but pass on a bit of joy and laughter, because we all need it. I've got the giggles inside now, it's lifted me up. But that's enough from today for Captain Dan. That's our story time finished for today. But we'll be back tomorrow, don't worry, with another tale to lift our spirits during this difficult time. And we're stuck at home. But I'm going to wish you a good night now. And I think you might know it by now, don't you? This is how it goes. Good night, oh sweet repose. Don't lie on your belly, because you might just squash your nose. Good night.